Right. Is this thing on? Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Arthur. You will have been contacted by someone from your company, government, or educational institution and agreed to this meeting. If you have not and are listening, please stop immediately and await for Foundation staff to deal with you. Normally, we would be doing this meeting in person, but even we have to deal with this damned pandemic. Your devices have been made secure by Foundation technicians, and any attempt to forward this video or tell anyone else about it will result in severe repercussions. I will now explain why you are here, but first, I will need to give you some information. This will help you understand exactly why we need you. Please listen to this whole instructional video before you make your decision. I am sure that some of you know of the 20th century author H.P. Lovecraft. Maybe you have heard of Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth, or maybe you know some of the films, books, video games, role-playing games, and other media that make up what we will refer to as the Lovecraft story world. Well, whether or not you know him, he, or more specifically this story world, is going to be important in understanding why you are here. I am going to introduce some of the most important parts of this story world, and after I will explain why they matter when you start your work. It is important that you listen and thoroughly understand, because from this point on, you will be responsible for disseminating this knowledge to others. So, as they say, let's start at the beginning. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was a writer of, and progenitor of what we know today as cosmic horror. That is, as Lovecraft himself put it in The Call of Cthulhu, "We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But some day, the piecing together of the associated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age." This piecing together is what most of his most famous stories within what is known as the Cthulhu mythos are about. It is important we understand some of the overarching themes that went into creating this mythos, because it will inform what would come later. Scholarly research into Lovecraft has only begun relatively recently, but despite that, he has an ardent following, and we have been able to reach out to Lovecraft scholar S.T. Joshi for some answers. On the reason Lovecraft wrote what he did and how, Joshi says, "Lovecraft emerged at a time where the standard motifs of earlier horror fiction, ghosts, vampires, werewolves, the haunted house, etc., were in his mind played out. They had been utilized too often, and they had also been rendered aesthetically unusable through advances in science that made them extremely implausible. This is why Lovecraft evolved a synthetic mythology of gods and other entities that allowed him to place the origin of his monsters in outer space, where the laws of nature may not be what we believe them to be on Earth. The characteristic Lovecraft story tells of narrators encountering these entities in out-of-the-way places, and coming to a realization that the vast powers and scale of these creatures render humanity's dominion of the Earth a grotesque mockery. This sense of cosmicism is his signature contribution to weird fiction. It is important to note how close Lovecraft came in his assessment, and we are still working on finding out exactly how he knew what he did. More importantly for us, Lovecraft never claimed ownership of the mythos. He was happy for other authors within the pulp magazines of the 1920s to use his ideas, characters, and lore. His peers and contemporaries have taken this further than he probably ever imagined it would go, and thus his story world was created. The Lovecraft story world provides a further example of how narrative inconsistencies may be accommodated. Rather than rely on story, the Lovecraft story world is logically consistent due to factors that derive from the original blueprint narratives, but are not dependent on their presence. This gave the mythos a sense of realism. If so many people are writing about these same monsters, maybe they could be real. At the time, we had no reason to know what he was doing. If we did, we may have had to do something about it. We have since arrived at the conclusion Lovecraft was most likely anomalous. He had knowledge of things he definitely should not have. This includes, but is not limited to, his knowledge of the Necronomicon and other books that chronicle anomalous entities that do exist. While these books do not exist under the name he gave them, the knowledge they contain does. Fortunately, he died before anyone outside the Foundation could piece this together. I think it would be good to know at this point some of the most characteristic stories. This will help you in your research. Look up these stories, read them, understand them. This will give you a better knowledge, and thus you will be able to help us more. Thankfully, Joshi has been able to help us here too. I believe The Colour Out of Space, 1927, and At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, embody Lovecraft's characteristic modes of writing to an exceptional degree. Both stories are grounded in scientific realism, chemistry and astronomy in the former, geology, paleontology, and biology in the second. Both display a slow accretion of bizarre details that culminate in the actual revelation of the cosmic entity or entities from outer space, with the result that both stories feature denouements of inexpressible power and intensity. So why am I telling you this? Well, we use what we can, when we can, how we can. So we will make it seem as if the progenitor of these ideas was a slightly odd New England xenophobe, and that anything that came after was a result of his genius, and not the fact that he was an unknown anomalous entity that the Foundation failed to contain. But this also includes you. So be aware that you are not special to us. If you fail at your duties, or give out any information we believe to be not under your remit, well, I'll go into different jobs within our little family later. So, how has the Lovecraft story world evolved? The Lovecraft story world is elicited by textual fiction, interactive fiction, short and feature-length film, fan art, comics, music, board games, role-playing games, computer games, and interactive environments. So, let's talk about some films. There is certainly reason to believe that films should be a good route in portraying Lovecraftian ideas. Lovecraft's fiction offers a rich imaginary world which could provide a good material for filmic transposition. Mysterious objects, forbidden secrets, adventurous explorations of the Australian desert or Africa, discovery of horrors at the heart of modern cities, investigative and initiatory quests, metamorphosis, scenes of blasphemous, shocking revelations, questions of identity, blurring of the frontiers between dream and reality, paroxysmic states of consciousness, alien beings and cosmic monsters. However, there are relatively few successful adaptations and many flawed films. But unsurprisingly, The themes have been used to better effect in non-adaptation films, from The Fog in 1980 to Event Horizon in 1997 and The Void in 2016. Through multiple subgenres of horror, these themes have survived and flourished and had no signs of dying out. Video games have also dabbled significantly into Lovecraftian themes. Some wear their Lovecraftian identity on their sleeve, such as The Sinking City and The Call of Cthulhu. The game, not the book, or the role-playing game. As you can see, that particular story is at the heart of things. But what is of more interest to us are the stories that use some of his themes to do something that is not possible in any other medium. Which brings us to Control. A game about a clandestine agency that has been tasked by a collective world government to secure, contain, and protect the human race against anomalous creatures, places, or objects about the public finding out about them. This is something you're going to want to make sure you remember. You'll see why soon. While interesting on its own, it also shares some of the narrative traits of the more traditional Lovecraft creation. The story is framed several times over, enclosed, bordered by various levels of narration. These multiple layers of narrative mean that there is an intrigue, a mystery that usually, by the end, we still only get a tiny glimpse into the totality of. There is a central narrative, and there isn't. The details of the world are super clear, and they aren't. The game is completely unsubtle about its messaging, and it totally obfuscates it. And while there are marked differences in the way Lovecraft created his narratives to how Control does, they seem to cast two different shadows into what we perceive to be reality, and we would think of those two things as separate, but they are actually just representations of the same thing. The invention of the internet has done much for many fields, and the creation of weird fiction is no different. And this is where the SCP Foundation comes in. Maybe you have heard of it, maybe you haven't. But this is where I must insist you listen carefully. Any information from now on is considered classified. Do not, under any circumstances, relay the things you hear to anyone else who is not part of the Foundation. Failure to adhere to this rule will result in termination. The SCP Foundation is a clandestine agency that has been tasked by the collective world government to secure, contain, and protect the human race against anomalous objects, entities, and phenomena. Supposedly created and curated by a large community on the internet, it is a whole universe of weird fiction that culminates into multiple canons and alternate universes to create something that some amongst the general population believe to be real. While I do not have time to give a complete description of all Foundation procedures, I will attempt to give you a brief outline. I will give examples, where possible, of SCPs that fit these criteria as a way to give you an outline of what you may have to deal with if you were to become a member of staff. Each instance of an anomaly is known as an SCP, and each have a detailed description of the anomaly and a containment procedure, which states how, if possible, each instance can be kept from escaping confinement and being found by the general populace. Any member of the public who comes into contact with an SCP that is not dead is given amnestics, which will make them forget what they have experienced. Each SCP is given an object class, which denotes how difficult it is to contain, and to an extent, how dangerous they are. These are as follows. Safe. These SCPs are extremely easy to contain. They can be inanimate objects, creatures, or places that can be kept without need of any extra containment procedure. However, that does not mean they are necessarily safe. It just means they are very easy to keep confined. A good example of this class is SCP-999, an orange gelatinous life form that, while born from the union of a human and an extra-dimensional god of chaos, is a force of good, and is able to cure depression and PTSD, and roams the halls of its containment site freely. Euclid. These SCPs are much more difficult to contain. They are usually dangerous and lethal to human life. These SCPs require significant extra containment procedure to keep from the public. They will usually have guards stationed outside their containment cells. For example, SCP-096, a vaguely humanoid being that will kill anyone who sees its face. The picture you see here is an artist's representation of the creature and cannot harm you. It is unstoppable once this has happened, but as long as it is not seen, it is not dangerous. Therefore, we have been able to keep it dormant. Keter. These SCPs are either impossible or extremely difficult to contain, and require extensive resources and procedure to contain. In most cases, they are simply not. And it is only by concerted efforts of the Foundation that the general public are unaware of them. These SCPs are the most likely to result in world-ending or reality-bending events. As most Keter-class entities are barred by Level 3 clearance, which none of you have, I am not at liberty to divulge any of them to you. Best not to think about it, really. There are more that we could go over, but at this time you need only know the bare essentials. The Foundation has many types of personnel. We'll start with D-Class. These are death row inmates. These are essentially expendable and hired by the Foundation to carry out the most dangerous tasks, including cleaning cells of dangerous SCPs, and being experiments to understand how certain anomalies function. This morally grey part of the way the Foundation is run is not confined to this. The Foundation has no qualms about terminating anyone that would interfere with what they believe is their duty. For example, SCP-204, also known as the Protector. It is a sentient group of nanobots that will take orphaned and mentally and physically abused children and protect them from any danger until they turn 14. The Foundation have a ready supply of these children to keep SCP-204 from escaping, and will make sure they meet the requirements of mentally and physically abused. If these children do not meet psychological testing standards after SCP-204 lets them go, they are terminated. There are also administrative staff and general staff like janitors. Above them are the multitude of scientists that make up the majority of staff. These range from researchers to doctors, who are usually given charge of a specific SCP, who they will investigate and help contain. Above these are the site leaders. These are high-ranking staff who oversee everything that goes on in a particular Foundation site, which are located all over the world. They have access to most information on every SCP and keep these sites running smoothly. Then, there is the Overseer Council, or O5 Council for short. The O5 Council are made up of 13 people whose identities are not known for safety. They are the ones who oversee the site leaders and make the big decisions about how the Foundation is run. Very little is known about these people. It's best for you if it stays that way. It is of the utmost importance that the general population never find out about the Foundation, or the anomalies that we contain. Outside the general panic that would be created, there would be many who see what we do as cruel, or even evil. Therefore, we must find ways to hide our identity. This is where you come in. You will, if you choose to accept the position, be required to go into your places of education, business, and government, and spread information that will make sure that people believe we do not exist. Not only that, but give people concrete theoretical reasons as to why. What we have talked about up until this point regarding the Lovecraftian story world is the way in which you will do this. If you do not accept, I do not advise not accepting. We at the Foundation have been careful in cultivating this wiki or fandom to make sure that the Foundation is grounded in the same sense of reality that Lovecraft was intent on creating in his stories. Anyone can make an SCP story, but only those that are greenlit by the community as a whole is made canon. So just like the pulp magazines of Lovecraft time, there is a sort of collective editing process that only allows the best, most interesting stories to become part of the bigger narrative. The SCP even has instances of Lovecraft's characters. For instance, SCP-2662 is simply called Cthulhu. But he is a 13-foot-tall humanoid who, while resembling Lovecraft's monster, has no malicious intent towards the human race. But he unknowingly invades the dreams of humans, so they believe he is a god who should be set free from Foundation custody. These attempts happen on a monthly basis. And Cthulhu himself? Well, he simply wants to be left alone and play video games. This type of meta-narrative is popular in the universe lore. However, many of the SCPs are incredibly dangerous and are a grave threat to humanity or even reality itself. There are, as of now, 6,000 SCPs, and there is no sign of it slowing down. There is very little doubt that this shared creation is Lovecraftian in its nature, with its blend of hyper-realistic scientific procedure and cosmic horror. Just like how there are some that believe that there really are entities from Lovecraft's writing, there are also those that believe that the Foundation actually exists, and that the creation of the wiki was the Foundation's way of making any stories that come out about them easy to dismiss as the writings of internet trolls. However, this has not been enough to completely eradicate the idea, and so we need you to use your influence within your places of work to make sure we are never discovered. Use what I have given you here as a basis to work off. You will be expected to do your own research and make sure that you are not just copying. If the same ideas and reasons keep being repeated by multiple people, then in many cases it may cause curious researchers to become suspicious. Just like Lovecraft's narratives contain multiple layers, the way we protect our identity from the world at large must also be. We chose you because you are clever enough to do this. Do it well, and you will be rewarded well. This brings us to the end of the video. It will now be deleted off your devices and scrubbed from existence. I hope this video has been informative for you. You will be contacted soon by members of Foundation staff who will give you more information about the role you will play, as well as dealing with any of you who do not wish to join us. Please believe me when I say that this is bigger than you, than any research you are doing. The fate of the whole world as you know it rests on us staying a secret. And we will do anything we deem necessary to make sure that stays the case. Hopefully, you will help us in doing that. I would say Godspeed, but well, God is in Foundation custody, so he can't do much for you. Audio log or notes concerning SCP XXXX, also known as Arthur. Object class safe. Containment procedures. Arthur needs no special containment procedures. He is allowed to roam the site as he pleases, and has his own room on the site with all amenities. He is harmless to both the world and its inhabitants. However, it is extremely problematic if treated without respect. Arthur must be treated as an esteemed member of staff at all times. Failure to do so will result in demotion to D class or termination. While Arthur is impervious to all physical damage, no member of staff is to attempt to harm it. Any member of staff found to have done so will be demoted to D class or terminated. Arthur has free reign to all Foundation files and resources, except for his own file, as mandated by the O5 Council. Arthur is not permitted to leave SCP custody under any circumstances. He must never be told this information. The reason for this is redacted. Arthur must never know he is an anomaly. The reason for this is redacted. Please see file Arthur-002 for a full breakdown of how to interact, pacify, and other ways engage with Arthur. This includes all sample interviews and interviews with staff who he seems to take a particular liking to. Arthur must be kept occupied and stimulated at all times. Failure to do so will cause him to become depressed and irritable. This can cause him to verbally abuse staff, and due to his preternatural intelligence, he is able to dissect any person's worst insecurities and play on them to devastating effect. See file Arthur-04 for evidence of this. Description. Arthur is a humanoid male around 6'4" in height and weighs roughly 180 pounds. He is slight and walks with a pronounced limp. Apart from this, every other feature is subject to change. This includes eye color, skin color, age, face construction, and body hair. He is not aware that this is anomalous. Any attempt to tell him will cause him to become depressed for a short period before he reconciles that whoever told him was either lying or joking. Arthur always names himself in the first person and does not need to know his real name. This is of no concern to him. When pressed on the subject, this is when he said he would be like to be called Arthur. When asked why, he communicated to research staff that he enjoyed the works of Sherlock Holmes, creator Arthur Conan Doyle. He is always clear to tell staff it is not his real name, and it is only a way of making identification easier. Arthur is extraordinarily intelligent. His ability to understand complex notions and concepts is unmatched anywhere in normal human society. Research has stated that traditional IQ tests are not applicable to Arthur, and importantly, he is aware of his intelligence and will not take part in any test he feels that is beneath him. Arthur is impervious to all physical harm, including disease and death. He is not aware that this is anomalous. Any attempt to tell him will result in Arthur saying something to the nature of, "That is what you think," or "You may believe that." In his time under Foundation custody, he has been able to create a cure to almost any disease or malady put in front of him. This normally takes less than 24 hours, but has been known to take longer. For example, cancer took over 2 months. He is also able to solve complex mathematical equations in seconds. Arthur is also an exceptional teacher and enjoys this task immensely. He has never failed in teaching a Foundation member what they have needed to know, and while he expects high standards, he is also kind and understanding when his students are struggling. Arthur has a photographic memory and can recall every moment of its existence in complete detail. However, he does not remember how he arrived at the Foundation. In fact, no member of Foundation staff, including O5 members, are able to remember this information, though they are all confident that he is of no danger to security of Foundation secrets. The reason for this is redacted. Arthur has been used on multiple occasions in Foundation induction videos and other in-person talks and lectures. His ability to teach, matched with his ability to recall all information he has seen, added to the fact that he seems to be incredibly charismatic on camera, means he is perfect for this role. He is particularly efficient at induction for D-Class staff. D-Class seem to trust him, where they do not trust other Foundation staff. Notes: I have tried multiple times to get Arthur reclassified as full meal class. All of these have been rejected. The reason for this is redacted. Arthur has been extremely helpful to the Foundation since he has been in Foundation custody since redacted. He has saved the lives of hundreds of Foundation staff, and his foundings have been instrumental in creating the Foundation's most recent form of amnestics. The world is a better place due to his presence, and this should be reflected in his classification. I am now awaiting an answer from the O5 Council on my latest reclassification request.